Good morning, Rob.
Good morning, Hillary, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. We're going to be discussing a new book that I'm coming out with. It's my third book on Chicago synagogues. And just to give you a little background, I started this project nearly 20 years ago by accident. For 30 years, I was a home and building inspector, and I came across this amazing looking condo that had all these Jewish motifs on it. And with further inspection, I found out it was actually a community center for one of the early renditions of Beth Synagogue on Crystal Avenue in the northwest side of Chicago. Fast forward, my wife and I decided to do some new pictures of our family coming to America. I'm a black and white photographer. I love black and white because as I get older, it kind of, makes everything look better, including myself. So I started researching her synagogue, went to Albany Park. Her synagogue was Beth, and of course, nothing was there. I went looking, I called my wife, I said, "Dear, I know you want me to take a picture for our foyer, but there's nothing there but a park." Of course, she said I was crazy, which is a normal answer for her when I ask a question. And I started doing research. I met a wonderful gentleman, Dr. Irving Cutler, who's been my mentor, my godfather in this whole process. And he happened to have this one picture that nobody else had. So I did a couple of books. I did hundreds of programs like this in person, of course. My first program was actually in a living room, so that with 5 people. So that's where we've come so far. And about a year ago, I decided that I wanted to document all the synagogues of Chicago, past, present, and knew that this would be an interesting project. Well, I started, and of course, I lost interest or something else happened, and COVID came along. And this gave me a great opportunity to really zero in on my project. And so the book that is going to be coming out, that's based on this program today, has over 500 images, sketches, illustrations, actual photographs that go back to 1861. So Chicago Jewry starts in 1847. The first synagogue, KAM, Kehillat Anshe Mariv, Congregation Men of the West, builds their first synagogue in 1851, where the Kluzinski Federal Building is today. So if you go around there, you'll see there's a plaque that says this is where the first synagogue is. Do not take a picture. There are federal marshals there, and they don't want you taking pictures of federal buildings since 9/11. So, of course, I didn't realize that, and as I was getting chased away, I knew the FBI would be waiting for me when I got home. Fortunately, they weren't, so that worked out just fine. What I'm about to start is we're going to do a survey. So my normal programs go from neighborhood to neighborhood. This is kind of like a general overall look of what my new project is going to be. There's a lot of new photographs. There's a lot of new ideas. There's a lot of new stories to go along with what we're doing today. So I'm going to go through the program. We'll have plenty of time to answer questions if you have them. And I love answering questions no matter what. Questions are always good. So Hillary, let's start.
Okay. If everyone will please remember to type your questions in the chat box, that would be fantastic. And
okay, here we go. So the picture that you see today, which of course is going to be the title of the book, Synagogues of Chicago, Faith, Form, and Function. So the title tells us a lot about what you're going to see. Faith, of course, is the different types of faith that we realize in our Jewish religion. But the buildings that you see today are not just Jewish buildings now, they're Christian buildings, they're Muslim buildings. Form, of course, is orthodoxy, conservatives, traditional, reconstructionist, reform. So all the different forms that our faith does take, and function, of course, is what are we doing today? So are these buildings condominiums, which many of them are? Are these buildings other community centers? Are they actually other houses of worship? So you will find that the vast majority of the images that you will see going forward, not necessarily today, but in the book, will be a lot of African-American churches, a lot of Hispanic churches. And of course, there's still a couple of mosques there that are still in Chicago, houses of worship. The first picture, of course, is one of my favorite. It's a Terrad Zion. It's on Spalding Avenue, just south of North Avenue in Humboldt Park. And the Crown of Zion, which is what a Terrad Zion means, is a beautiful Hispanic church today. It's on the west side of Humboldt Park as opposed to the east side of Humboldt Park. It's a beautiful building, and they have still the original stained glass windows intact. Next, Hillary. Okay, so this is the JCC, so I thought I would give the Jewish Community Centers of Chicago a really, really nice play in my book. And so there are many, many photos that start with the history of the Chicago Hebrew Institute, which is the predecessor of the Jewish Community Centers of Chicago. We started in 1903. So Chicago Judaism, which starts, basically in the 1840s, by the beginning of the century, we have a lot of new immigrants coming in from Eastern Europe, and there needs to be a place for them. And so the Chicago United Federated Jewish Charities decided to buy a building on Blue Island near Maxwell Street. And this is where the first Chicago Hebrew Institute started. Now, you may know the name. The initials are CHI or SHI, as in Camp Shy. So Camp Shy actually stands for Camp Chicago Hebrew Institute. This building was great, but it didn't really meet the needs of the Jewish people. And so through the great largesse and charitability of Julius Rosenwald of Sears Roebuck, next Hillary, they buy what was originally the Sacred Heart Convent on Taylor Street near Little. Now, Taylor Street is very interesting. If you're not Jewish, it's Little Italy. If you're Jewish, of course, it's the near west side, and it's connected to Maxwell Street area. So this is Taylor and Little. As you can see, there's a bunch of people getting ready to take a great trip. Again, Julius Rosenwald bought Sacred Heart Convent. The building burnt down. They rebuilt this beautiful community center, and it was here from 1907 until 1926 when they built the new JPI, or the Jewish People's Institute, when the Jewish population started moving to the west side. Next, Hillary. So in order to qualify for being in this book, we deal with synagogues, community buildings, temples, and synagogues. So virtually every community building, whether it's a hospital or a community center, has some type of chapel or synagogue in it. And this is the chapel that was inside the Chicago Hebrew Institute. So you can see it was absolutely very, very beautiful. Next. Next, there we go. So here's a very, very good picture that's really on the corner of Taylor Street and Little. And if you drive there today, this is still an empty lot, which is amazing. So for over 50, 60 years, nothing has been built there. Don't understand why, but again, this is the Taylor Street of the Chicago Hebrew Institute. Next, please. Okay. As a Jewish population, as you know, we're a very, very movable people. And so as the Jewish population started moving further west, there was going to be a need for another community center for the Jewish people. So the Jewish population started moving out of the Maxwell Street area between 1908 and 1911. And by the early 20s, just about everyone, all the Jewish families and institutions were out of business in the Maxwell Street area. So here we are on Douglas Boulevard, and this is the Jewish People's Institute, the JPI, where many people were on the rooftop gardens, had early romances, people went to nursery school here. Today it's part of the Lawndale Academy, which is a very, very popular and very, very prominent part of the North Lawndale community. And even to this day, virtually all the motifs, the terrazzo, the Stars of David, the menorahs, all those still exist as you walk into this incredibly impressive community building that was built for the Jewish people. You have to remember that on the west side was the largest Jewish community ever in the history of Chicago. At one time when this was built, which is roughly a few years before the Depression hit in 1929, there were over 60 synagogues and community buildings on the west side, as well as over 120,000 Jewish people. So over half the Jews that were living in Chicago at the time were living on the west side. Next, please. Okay, so because this is my book, there's a picture of me when I was, I think, about 3 years old. What was interesting is if you look at the young African-American girl, in the first book that I didn't even realize there were African-Americans on the west side. When you're a little kid and you're going to school, everyone is a little kid. So in my first book, Doors of Redemption, she relates her story about going to the JPI, which was pretty poignant and very, very powerful. Next, please. Okay. As the Jewish community started moving out of the west side, they started moving further south. As we know, they moved further west to Oak Park. They hit the south shore of Chicago and eventually the south suburbs. And of course, they started moving north in the greatest numbers moved north to Albany Park, Hollywood Park, and Rogers Park, and eventually into the north and northwest suburbs. So the first JCC, which is what we're doing today, the first Jewish Community Center was built in 1941 through the charitable giving of Max Strauss. So the Max Strauss JCC was built in 1941. It was there till 1968. Now, since I started my program much later, I'm not sure why the building was torn down or what kind of condition it was, but this was on Wilson Avenue, and this was a very important corner. It was right across from Jensen Park and, of course, Albany Park Hebrew congregation, which was the largest conservative Jewish congregation in the Albany Park community. Maxwell Strauss was very important to Albany Park. It gave the Jewish kids a place to hang out, to play basketball, to be involved in all types of crafts, and of course, all the different clubs. If you were all kids growing up in Chicago in the 50s and 60s, or even the 70s, the clubs associated with the Jewish community centers were very, very important. Next, please. Okay, this was my little hangout. This is was known as the Rogers Park Club. It was established in 1949 in this old mansion. And from 1949, roughly until the late 60s, early 70s, it was the epicenter of the East Rogers Park Jewish community youth. Later on, it became a place where Russian Jews were helped out as they were getting through their Americanization, as they were learning the ways of Chicago and America and how on their way to becoming citizens. But for 15 years or so, this was the place where, as a young person, you could go and hang out and have a place that was safe, secure, and socialization was really, really important. This is where I learned how to play basketball. And many, many people got their start early on in life going to the Rogers Park Club. Next, please. Okay, in 1949, not to be outdone, on the south side was the Hyde Park Club in 1949. Again, this was in a storefront where ours was in an old mansion home. And for the Hyde Park South Side kids, this was their first taste, their first organized JCC, or excuse me, JPI or early JCC for them. This was still known as the Hyde Park Club of the JPI because for about 5 or 10 years, JPI and JCC were almost synonymous with each other. They were actually, they were used interchangeably. So even though it's the JPI here, it was in fact the JCC, the first one in the Hyde Park area. Next, please. Okay, for all you kids that grew up in South Shore, this of course is the Henry Hart JCC on South Jeffrey Boulevard. It was the last Jewish building built on the south side of Chicago. 1959 to 1960 it was dedicated. And up until Anita, I'll have to get to that one in a second. I'm having a little brain freeze. Up until the south suburban JCC was built, this was the epitome. This was the epicenter of Chicago youth jewelry. This is South Shore and also the Pill Hill area. So there was a lot going on. Down the block was B'nai Yehuda. So there was a lot going on here, which was very, very interesting. And the building, of course, is one of the few Jewish buildings that are still there today. Is the community center on South Shore. And it's in very, very good condition. And you can go by there today and it looks absolutely great. Next, please.
Rob, I just want to remind everybody that we're going to answer the questions at the end so they can keep sending them, but we will answer the questions once you are done with your presentation.
Okay, great. Okay, the next picture you see, the next photo you see is the Jewish Community Center of Niles Township, which was in Skokie. So the first expedition into the North Shore, the North Suburbs, was the JCC Center in Niles Township. Later, of course, and you'll see that they built Max Meyer Kaplan Center, but this was the predecessor of Meyer Kaplan. And you can see the youth standing outside the storefront. Just like most synagogues, a lot of the Chicago community centers started in small buildings, small storefronts, little homes. This was very, very important because it was very important for the Jewish community to establish outposts for their youth. And later on, you'll see how some of these smaller buildings really morphed into some absolutely beautiful community centers. Next, please. Here we go, Anita Stone. I knew I would get to it eventually. I thank Hillary and her friends for this photo. It was very hard to find an Anita Stone JCC photo. It is still there today. It is a building, but it's when you go on Google or when you start looking around for this building, all you see is like a banner. So they actually have this 1980s building is very, very impressive. And it's important to myself in the book that I'm doing is because I wanted to be able to represent every part of jewelry. A lot of times the west side is very prominent or the north side is very prominent and the south side gets kind of short shrift. And so in all my programs, I always like to make sure that everyone is represented so they get a sense of buy-in, they get a sense of what's really important as we go through the entire Chicago Metro Jewish community. And Anita Stone was in Flossmoor was a very, very, very important part of that. Next, please. Okay. Back in my old neighborhood, which is where I lived for 25 years in Buffalo Grove, this is the Jacob Duman JCC. Now, this is on the Cook County side, on Old Buffalo Grove Road, and it was there for many, many years until the Jewish community, even in Buffalo Grove, started moving around, and now, of course, they're in a storefront on the north end of Buffalo Grove, Long Grove community. But for the Cook County side of the Jewish Community Center, Jacob Duman donated the money for this amazing building. And so in the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, this was a very, very important place for the Jewish community to establish their community center for their youth, for their clubs, their organizations, a place that they knew that they could come and be able to conduct their businesses.
Rob, just a point of information, the Jacob Duman JCC was in a storefront on Half Day Road in Buffalo Grove for many years. Yes. And currently it is on our Lake County campus, which is on Old McHenry Road in Lake Zurich. So we have a huge campus out there now that houses both our Early Childhood Center and our Elaine Frank Apache Day Camp.
Okay, so you know what that means, Hillary. You have to send me a picture so I can update my book.
I will do that.
Thank you. That's great. Next photo, please. Okay. So the North Shore got its first JCC in the 60s. This is Meyer Kaplan JCC in Skokie on Church Street. And even though it is no longer an active community center today, one of the great things that I wanted to accomplish in this book is that to be able to notate every Jewish organization and building that I could, so that for the last, from 1851 to 2001, people would be able to go to a source and say, aha, I knew there was something here, and now I've got some information with a great photo. So again, even though Meyer Kaplan is not an active JCC, they were there for many decades, and now I believe they've merged with Northbrook, I think, but we'll go with that later. Next, please. Okay, so here we are, the Bernard Wanger JCC. This is absolutely beautiful, and this is even though there's a new one that Hillary mentioned in Lake County, in Cook County on the North Shore, this is the place where people come. This was built, of course, through the great donation of Mr. Bernard. And today it houses the JCC as well as many other organizations. And again, this is the epicenter for the North Shore where people come. And hopefully it will be here for many decades to come. Next, please.
Rob, sorry, I just want to make sure we're keeping all the facts straight. So when we added our fitness center, the Marvin Lusbader Center has been open for about 3 years now. The building became strictly a JCC building, so we don't house any other organizations in the building anymore, just strictly JCC. And yes, it is sort of the epicenter of where most of our staff sits. Lots of our programs come out of this building, but then we also have our other campuses where we have early childhood, camp, and the like. So Hate to interrupt, just want
No,
everyone to be
no,
clear.
no, this is great because now not only is our group learning, I'm also learning, and I'm making so I can make my proper changes. So that when this book comes out, I don't get panned by every single person that ever saw it.
All right, I will go on to the next slide.
Go ahead. Very good. Okay, so this is the Hyde Park JCC, and this is very interesting. And please correct me if I'm wrong, Hillary, but this is the first fusion of a Jewish community center and a synagogue. So here we have the Hyde Park JCC and Road Fade Tzedek housed in the same building, separate organizations. So there's a synagogue there as well as the JCC center. And I don't know if this is the prototype for the future, but here's a question of being in Hyde Park with a, for a lack of a better word, a dwindling Jewish population. So in order to keep an active conservative synagogue in the Hyde Park area, the other synagogue being, of course, the Reformed Synagogue, KM Isaiah Israel, the JCC and Road Fade Tzedek were able to put together their organizations in this fusion building and were able to recreate a positive, forward-looking organization for the Jewish people of Hyde Park, which is incredible. So this building, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. No, that's fine. You can go on to the next. Okay, so I always start my program here in Rogers Park. This is B'nai Zion's first building. It's actually St. Paul's by the Lake Church. B'nai Zion was started in 1917. They moved into this building in 1919, and we're here until 1928. And B'nai Zion was, of course, the first and the largest conservative Jewish congregation on the north side of Chicago. And they were in existence till 2002, and then they merged with Shir Tikva, and then they went out of business by 2008 or 10, which was very sad. But again, that's the reason why I wrote the book, so that people would have a place for their remembrances. Next, please. So in 1928, B'nai Zion moved out of their Lant Avenue building, and they moved to 1447 West Pratt Boulevard. And from 1928 until 2002, they were housed in this beautiful, magnificent synagogue. This was the premier and synagogue, and when I go through my program, I tell people that I was here 7 days a week when I was a child in the 50s and early 60s. 4 days a week was Hebrew school. Friday night services, Saturday was junior congregation, and Sunday, of course, was Sunday school. So I, myself, and most of my friends, we weren't, it's not that we were religious, so people get the wrong impression. It's just that culturally and socially, this was the center of our life for many, many years. And like I said, I attended here from 1956 until they closed or sold to Lakeshore Nursery School in 2002. Next, please. Okay, moving a little bit further south on Foster Avenue, just west of California. Originally known as the Tirith Israel Anshe Tikton, this became Mikra Kodesh Anshe Tikton in the 1950s. It was an outgrowth of a synagogue from the west side of Chicago. And up until, I would say, 2002 or 12, it was actually sold to a Lubavitcher organization, who unfortunately sold it, tore it down and sold it for a profit. So they were donated the building for free, and actually Mikra Kodesh Anshe Tikton is still in existence on Howard Street on the far north side of Chicago. Next, please. And this is where next to my wife's story begins. This is Beth Yitzchak. This is one of the few known photos of Beth Yitzchak that was given to me by the wonderful Dr. Irving Cudler, and he kind of set my footing next to Hillary on what was really right and wrong and what I was doing in my research. This was on Drake Avenue, so it was known as the Drake Avenue Shul. It was started in 1917. This was built in 1919 and 1921, expanded later, and was around for a long time. And sadly, as the neighborhood became Korean, this was the only synagogue that would not sell to them. So instead of selling to them, becoming a Korean church or temple, it went into disarray, became a crack house, and the city eventually tore it down. Next, please. Also in Albany Park, the largest conservative Hebrew congregation, where Beth Yitzchak was Orthodox. Albany Park Hebrew started as an Orthodox temple in 23 and quickly became a conservative temple. And this, of course, is across from Jensen Park and also the JCC. Next, please. The largest Reform synagogue in Albany Park is Beth Israel, which today, of course, is in Skokie on Dempster Street. This was a breakaway from Beth Yitzchak. They thought Beth Yitzchak was too religious for them, so they started a Reform temple in 1919. This was built in 1921, and they built a beautiful school in 1923. Again, it became a Korean church. It was recently, the last 20 years, a Romanian Pentecostal church, and now the building is for sale. So we don't know what's going to happen to it. Hopefully it'll still be something that they won't tear it down, because it's absolutely magnificent inside. It still looks like a synagogue. Next, please. And you can see here's Beth Israel on Bernard and Albany, and this is what it looked like when it was turned over to the Korean church. And next, of course, you can see the Hebrew school. Next, please. The traditional Orthodox synagogue in the Albany Park, Hollywood Park area was Beth Jacob, and this was here for many, many years. Today it is a Korean church. Next, please. The second most popular conservative synagogue in Albany Park was KJS, or Kehilas Jeshurun Synagogue, and again, very, very, very popular. Judge Jerry Orbach was able to save many of the stained glass windows. Next, please. Also on Kesey Avenue in Albany Park, this is Or Israel. As you can see, this was the 70s. Someone spray painted the PLO sign on there. Next, please. This is Ha-Knesset Orthodoxy, a synagogue that started back on the west side on Christiana Avenue. In 1950-51, they built a synagogue right here on Troy and Ainsley. Next, please. This is an amazing photo, and it's amazing in the sense that B'nai Israel of Albany Park on Lawrence Avenue, 3140 West Lawrence Avenue. This took me 18 years to find this photo, and it was graciously donated to us by Rachel Braun, who is a very prominent Jewish historian in Chicago and now in Florida. This has gone through an interesting transition. It was a synagogue, it was a funeral home, a Weinstein funeral home, and it was also a Romanian Pentecostal church. And then, of course, it was torn down. Today, there's a fruit stand there. So as far as I know, this is the first time that people have seen this building in probably 50 years. And for many of us have ever seen this building. Next, please. This is B'nai Shalom of Albany Park, a traditional synagogue on Sawyer and Ainsley. This was the first synagogue built right after World War II in 1948, and the building is there today, and it is a church, of course. Next, please. Not all Jewish organizations were synagogues. This is the Hapoel HaMizrahi, or the religious Zionist organization, whose goal was to get everybody to Israel, and this was on Foster Avenue. Next, please. Now we get over to Austin at 52 North Central Avenue. This is Central Hebrew Congregation, Anshe Shaval, or Men of Shaval. And today, of course, it's a Kingdom Hall. But this picture at least captures what it looked like as a synagogue. Today, it's been covered over with some other material. So there's all the evidence, like the Ten Commandments that you're seeing here, do no longer exist. Next, please. This is the cover of my first book. This is B'nai Israel of Austin on Jackson Boulevard. Today, of course, it is a church. The Hebrew School Building Community Center is right next door to it. This was built in 23. The community center was built in 1948. Even into the late 40s, there was great optimism for the Jewish community in the small Jewish area of Austin. They did have 3 synagogues there. By the 1960s, the Jewish community had pretty much disappeared, but all 3 synagogues still are there and intact, which is pretty impressive. Next, please. The traditional synagogue in Austin on South Central was, of course, Austin Jewish Community Center. Rabbi Learfield was their long-serving spiritual leader. And today, and in this picture, which was taken in 2003, you can see the Lions of Judah. You can see the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue, and the beautiful stained glass windows. And today, of course, it is a church. And about 4 years ago, they completely did away with any evidence of it being a former Jewish synagogue. It was bricked up in this mundane red brick, and that's what it looks like today. Next, please. We're in Logan Square, and this conservative congregation shared Tzedek, gates of righteousness. Two very important words in synagogues are sheri and anshe. Anshe means men, and sheri means gates. And this was the largest conservative synagogue in Logan Square on Fullerton Avenue, just east of Kedzie. It was torn down in the 80s or 90s, and today there's a condo building there. Next, please. Beth El, which was the largest Reform synagogue in Logan Square. Next, please. Here you can see it. As many of you may have read, in the last couple of years, it's been renovated and it's now restored to as a condominium, as a apartment building or a condominium building. And what's interesting is a friend of mine was just walking by, this was just a month or so ago, and for many years in the front there, right above the door where the pediment is, was a boys club of Logan Square, Boys and Girls Club. And so today you're seeing for the first time since 1959, the name Beth El, and actually it's called Beth El Center. This was built in 1923 and was here until 1955 when they moved to Touhy Avenue in West Rogers Park. So this is an amazing picture to have it look as it did when it was originally constructed. Next, please. And this is what it looks like today. Very, very beautiful building. In fact, you can see the bar right in front of the building where the Boys and Girls sign had hung. Next, please. This is Mishkan Israel on Altgeld in Logan Square. This was a Orthodox, later conservative synagogue. Later it was sold to the Hispanic community. Next, please. They moved to 2056 North Kedzie Avenue, which is right down the street from my aunt and uncle and my grandparents. This was a very, very popular synagogue in the 50s and 60s and later was sold to the Serbian community. Next, please. This is Northwest Community Home for the Aged. It's a very interesting building. It was founded in 1940 by Judge Zlatnik as a place for the aging Jews in the Logan Square Northwest Side community. The original building, which you see on the left, was built by a ship captain for his daughters. He wanted to have his girls together in the same building so they would talk to each other. In 1940, it was purchased by Northwest Home for the Aged. Today, of course, they're in West Rogers Park. Next, please. Okay, this is KBS or Kehileth B'nai Shalom. If the first synagogue in Chicago was KAM, the second one was KBS. They broke away in 1852, and in 1864 they built this beautiful building on Federal Avenue. And today, of course, there's no picture of the photograph because of the Chicago fire, but we still have this illustration. Next, please. In 1877, they moved into these larger quarters on Michigan Avenue between 14th and 16th Street, and I was here for a number of years until this burnt down. We have a very, very sad history of our synagogues being burnt down or being blown down by typhoons and things that just don't happen in Chicago that used to happen, I guess, in the 19th century. Next, please. Okay, this is Sinai Congregation. After establishing itself on Monroe Street in 1861, in 1876, they built this beautiful synagogue on Indiana Avenue and 26th Street. Later, next please. Later, it was remodeled by Adler and Sullivan in 1892. And it was here until 1911 when they moved to further south on Grand Boulevard, which of course today is Martin Luther King Boulevard. Next, please. This was the first building of Beth HaMidrash HaGadol in 1867 on Pacific Avenue. This is a really rare photo that I found strictly by accident. What's interesting is that even though I'm living in Las Vegas, in case I didn't mention that earlier, living my whole life in Chicago, I retired to Las Vegas in 2014. Because of the internet and because of my network of wonderful friends, I was able to locate this early photo. Of course, this is the near West Side Maxwell Street area. Next, please. This is the first Talmud Torah called Eitz Chaim Talmud Torah in the Maxwell Street area. This I found in a book by a Rabbi Kushner. And so this is a very rare to be able to find a building from that era, from the early 1900s. Next, please. Again, you can see how it says here, Eitz Chaim, which is the first, is the name of the first Talmud Torah. Next, please. Okay, the last commission by Adler and Sullivan for a full building was Zion Congregation in 1885. This was known as the Near West Side by Ogden and Washington Boulevard. It's an outpost of Sinai Congregation. This is one of the nicest photos I've ever seen in this area. Later it was torn down, and this is where the Union headquarters are. Next, please. This is the first building of Road Feit Tzedek in 1900. This is on East 48th Street near Michigan Avenue. Next, please. In 1923 at 54th and Greenwood in the High Park area is their second or third building for Road Feit Tzedek. This is an absolutely beautiful neoclassic building designed by A. Epstein and Sons. And it was so important that the University of Chicago bought it, said we're going to turn it into a library, and tore it down. And today there's townhouses there. Next, please. In 1952, Road Feit Tzedek, again designed by A. Epstein and Son, designed this beautiful classic building. And again, it was here until 2000 when they tore it down for their new building that we saw earlier today. Next, please. And here's the building again. So we saw it under the JCCs, and of course, now we're seeing it over on High Park Boulevard under Road Feit Tzedek. Next, please. Okay, this is Shalom Aleichem School. A lot of people, I have a page on Facebook called Synagogues of Chicago, and a lot of people came to the school in Hyde Park. Next, please. Out in Beverly, so we were talking earlier, Hillary and we were talking about that Chicago Jewish community have been in many places, in Roseland, on the south side, on the west side of Chicago, in Beverly. This was Beth Torah, and they were there for about 20 years. Next, please. And on the far north side on Waukegan Avenue was Am Echad. This was on Sheridan Road, and it was built in the early 1920s, designed by Alfred Altschuler and Sons. An absolutely beautiful classic building. Next, please. On the far south suburbs, we have Joliet Hebrew Federation, built in the 1920s, an absolutely beautiful classic building. Next, it was later replaced with the Joliet Jewish Federation building, and this was in 1968. So the first building was built in 27, and this is the new building today, and it's there, and it's absolutely beautiful, a very vibrant Jewish community in South Suburban Joliet. Next, please. This is B'nai Joshua, their first building, BJBE, but it was B'nai Joshua originally in the 1890s at Cullerton and Halsted Street. Next. Later, they moved to 20th and Ashland Avenue in the Pilsen community, and they were here up until the early 1960s when they merged in suburban Glenview with Beth Elohim. So this is BJ. This is B'nai Joshua. Okay, this was the original rendering by the architect of B'nai Joshua. Next, please. Again, they merged in the 1960s with Beth Elohim and this beautiful round synagogue. They were here up until a few years ago when they moved to North Suburban Deerfield. Next, please. And here is their North Suburban building. Absolutely beautiful. It's a synagogue. I believe the high school is nearby there. Next, please. And we end with the Jewish Federation building, and we end with it because it's no longer here. So on Franklin Street, this was the latest rendition before they moved into of their own particular building. So here we are, Hillary. We made it.
We sure did. We definitely made it. So thank you for going through that. I'm going to scroll through all the questions now.
Okay.
We'll see what we've got going on.
Okay.
So someone wants to know, Elliot Cohen would like to know if you are Josh's father.
Yes.
So Elliot, there's your answer. And I'm going to go into the questions
I
now.
used to be known as Rob Packer, now I'm known as Josh's father.
We all have that problem once we have kids. There used to be a shul at about 93rd in Houston in South Chicago. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, it was 89th in Houston, and it was originally known as B'Kor Olam, later Agudath Achim B'Kor Olam, and they moved further south. They were there anywhere from, according to history, 1898 or 1902. It was the longest serving synagogue building in the history of Chicago. So services were continuous there for longer there. The only building that's coming up close, of course, is KM Isaiah Israel, which started in 1923, and it's coming up on its 100th year.
Stephen Franklin said, thanks for taking on this project. Why do so many historic Chicago synagogues have a theme of threes on their facets? 3 doorways, 3 large overhead windows, etc.
Okay, so I've been struggling with this question for nearly 20 years. And from the best I can figure out, the Catholic cathedral model is pretty much what we've gone to. Early on in Judaism, there was no rabbi, like there was a priest or a minister. So as Judaism started changing, especially in America, the designs of their synagogues started to take on similar architectural elements of churches. So the 3 doors, which of course indicated something different in the Catholic ceremony, became just a prominent idea and design for synagogues. And the larger the synagogue and the more elaborate and more elegant it was, the more you'll see those 3 windows and you'll see the 3 doors.
Where was the original JCC in Skokie? It looks like a former Jewel on Oakton.
That is correct. That's exactly where it was. Excuse me. That's exactly where it was.
Okay. If a synagogue is sold to a developer for condos, etc., how are the proceeds distributed?
Okay, well, in the old days, there used to be a middleman because for some reason, the Orthodox community did not like selling their synagogue for another purpose. So there was an attorney middleman, and he sold it to either another church community, another synagogue, or for the development. So depending on if it's a synagogue if it's a current synagogue that's just moving to another building, they get the proceeds. In the case of the Beth El building on Palmer near Spalding, those proceeds go to the building that's owned by, which of course is the Boys and Girls Club of Chicago. So it really depends who owns the building.
Do you have pictures of the inside of any of the buildings that you might compile into a book?
Okay, so early on, so my first program was in 2002 or 3. Those programs, I have newsletters, I have some interior photos. The problem with getting interior photos, the pictures that I took myself from 2002 until up to the present, where I was granted access to the building, I have those pictures. And as you can see, these programs tend to go on. They take on a life of themselves. So when I do this program in person and I have a lot more time, I'm able to do pictures of the interior. But time being what it is, I don't have 2-3 hours, nor do people want to sit through 2-3 hours where they can see the buildings and the interiors. What I may do for the future is actually just do a couple exteriors and do more interior photos if I see there's more interest in that.
Was Max Strauss part of the noted Strauss family of department store fame?
You're talking about Abraham and Strauss in New York? Not that I'm aware of. He was a Chicago industrialist.
Where was the original JCC in Rogers Park? Now the one that the Harwich we know is on Toohey, but where was that original building?
That was originally on Greenview Avenue, just south of Howard Street. And the building is still there today.
Is there a map available of all these sites? I'm curious as to how many of these buildings have experienced a second or third life. Thanks for the fantastic research.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, thanks again to my dear friend and mentor, Dr. Irving Cutler, in his book. Let me find it here. Okay. In his wonderful book, Jews of Chicago. So I'm going to give Irving. So this was published in the 90s. It's still available. He has maps of every major Jewish community and their buildings. So whether it's the south side, the west side, the near north side, the far north side, at least not suburban, but it has all the Chicago locations.
So we had some questions about, you know, the north side, other synagogues, and Rob and I are in talks to do another another presentation like this to you know, share more about different synagogues around the area. So stay tuned. Let's see. Someone was asking about the South Shore Temple.
Yes. Okay. So as Hillary was just mentioning, this was kind of like an overview. So I have in my archive, I have South Shore, I have the West Side, I have the full Northwest side, North Side. So I have all the synagogues that everyone I'm sure is chopping at the bit that want to see, but time constraints does not allow me to go through the 400, 500 photos that I do have. You're more than welcome. No, I'm just kidding. You're more than welcome to dial me up and I'll go through every photo with you. But as Hilly was mentioning, we're hoping to do several programs where we will target the near west side and the west side, South Shore and Hyde Park, where we can do more, really concentrate on every building, because there's literally hundreds of buildings that we can talk about and that I have available.
How many synagogues do you think there have been over the course of Chicago's life and the surrounding areas?
Okay, so when you talk about synagogues like Sinai that have been in 6 locations, Bethel in 5 locations, KM in multiple locations, Kehillah B'nai Shalom. So we have somewhere between 400 and 450 actual synagogue buildings scattered amongst about 150 continuous synagogue congregations through
Wow.
conservative, Orthodox, traditional, Reconstructionists. So Lubavitch. So throughout the history, from, like I said, hopefully we'll be able to do is, by the time I'm done and COVID is over, it'll go from 1851 to 2020 or 2021, and we'll be able to document what was and what is continually happening. As you know, in the West Rogers Park area, there's over 30, 35 synagogues there, and many of them are under 5-10 years old. So,
Right. Someone's asking about the Amichad building by Alfred Alschuler. Is that still standing? And
No.
do you know the address?
Yes, that was on Sheridan Road. I can get you that address later. It was on Sheridan Road near either Judd or Sunset. No, that building was torn down in the 1960s when they moved to Sunset in Western Waukegan. So once they moved into this, it's gigantic. The building in the Hebrew School Community Center is literally a large campus. But that was torn down, like I said, in the 60s.
When will your new book be out?
If all things go well, it'll be coming out spring of 2021.
There was a synagogue on 14th between Harding and Springfield. Do you know?
14th between Harding and Springfield. Let's see. Let's get back
Look
to
that up and get back, right?
Yes, we can get back to you on that.
All right. Alan, send me an email, hwank@jccchicago.org, and we will get you that answer. Let's see. Someone wants to talk about the South Shore Temple, history of South Shore Temple.
Well, South Shore Temple, of course, as you know, started in 1923, and they built a community center Hebrew school first. And if you go down there, what's called Landmark Temple, Landmark Church, the community center is there. And if you look behind the shrubbery, you'll see where it says community house, which is what community centers were called back in the 20s. To the Jewish people, establishing a Hebrew school was the most important thing. So in many cases, you'll see a Hebrew school or a community center before you see the synagogue. The synagogue wasn't built until 20 years later in 1952. And so that whole campus of Landmark was the original South Shore Temple on South Jefferson.
Congregation New Tamid on Rosemont in California. Is that still
Tamid,
exist?
yes.
Is that still around?
Well, that building now is a school, and there is a smaller version, I believe, on Western Avenue. They're part of a couple different egalitarian minions. So yes, they still exist, but not in the form that you would have remembered if you went there.
Someone's asking how the Jewish community of Las Vegas compares to the Chicago area Jewish community.
Well, in the sense of being generous, they're very generous. It's actually a very vibrant, it's a very small Jewish community, as you can imagine, compared to Chicago. But we support grammar schools, high schools, community centers. The one that I was going to for a number of years, Beth Shalom, which is a conservative temple, just added a large addition. So the Jewish community here is and it's all over Henderson and Las Vegas, is doing very, very well. So it's on a positive trajectory.
Sandra Parker says, I think you win the prize for making the most productive use of COVID isolation.
Thank you. That's very kind. I don't know if my wife would agree with that.
What is happening to Agudas Achim at 5225 North Kenmore?
Okay, well, that building is, you may or may not know, was taken over by a developer. It is an apartment building. All the stained glass windows, including the beautiful arc, that stained glass was manufactured or fabricated in Italy. Right now, it's sitting in a warehouse. Several people from my synagogue group on Facebook have been trying to find out what exactly his intent is, and no one really knows. It would take a lot of money to underwrite a full restoration, or it's possible that some congregation now or in the future will want to use it for their own Aron Kodesh. But that's what's going on today on Kenmore Avenue. That has a very, as you probably know, over the last 30 years, has had a very tenuous history between its former rabbi and its former congregation and the owner of the synagogue. They were not necessarily the same people. Next.
Someone is asking about the history of NSJC in Morton Grove.
NSJC in Morton, North Suburban Jewish Congregation. North Suburban Jewish Congregation in Morton Grove no longer exists. It was sold to a Catholic Syrian or Catholic Chinese or some type of Catholic organization. The building is there. Many of the motifs are still there. The Hebrew school is still there, but they became part of Beth Shalom in Northbrook.
So we have Sharon Raven said that her grandfather was the cantor at Beth Shalom of Rogers Park in the 40s and 50s, and her aunt was composer Max Janowski's associate with him at KAM and then KAM2.
All right, well, tell her she comes from a great pedigree. Beth Shalom, of course, was a traditional synagogue just down east of us on Pratt Boulevard. Rabbi Gold was their most prominent spiritual leader, and they were there from the 30s in a small little house, so they built their building in the 50s, and they were there. They had a fire in the early 2000s. They tried to recover, and then vandals destroyed the synagogue. And I believe somewhere between 2008 and 2012, it was raised, and I believe it's still, I don't know if a building has been built there. It's possible there's an apartment building there. Last time I looked, which was, 5-6 years ago, it was just a lot. It was just torn down, sadly.
There was a large JCC on South Phillips Avenue in South Shore. If I recall, it was a Crown Center.
Young Men's Jewish Council at 76th and Phillips. Interesting corner. One corner was Beit Betzael, a sort of synagogue. The other corner was Habonim congregation that was founded by the survivors of Hitler's Germany, Europe. And Young Men's Jewish Council was there from the 40s or 50s up until the 70s when South Shore started to change. It is still a community center today. In fact, all three buildings, if you go there, are still there. They're well maintained, and you get a sense of Jewish history on the South Shore when you're on that corner.
Someone would like to know where you went to high school.
Roger C. Sullivan.
What do you know of the many huge synagogues that were on Douglas Boulevard in the 40s?
Okay, so from the early part of the 20th century, 1911 on, up until the 1950s, what we would consider the cathedral building period of Chicago synagogue construction took place. And Douglas Boulevard all the way up to Independence Boulevard was really a boulevard, especially during the high holidays, of these magnificent buildings, one after another. Like I said before, North Lawndale had roughly 60 synagogues and community buildings. And so the promenade of Douglas Boulevard, especially in the 20s and 30s, and possibly into the 40s, much less so in the 50s, was a cavalcade of well-to-do jewelry during the high holidays. And up until 10 years ago, up until 20 years ago, most of these buildings were still intact. Of course, they were all African-American churches, but little by little, the Hebrew Theological College, the roof caved in and that was torn down. Many of the other buildings, little by little, they were just, we have a history of Chicago mayors that don't like Jewish buildings. I hate to say that, and I don't mean to be political, but they see no purpose in saving Jewish culture. And that's what's happened to these buildings. So within the next 10, 20 years, the only place you'll see these buildings will be on programs from people, not just me, but people that are doing what I'm doing today.
Eddie Rosenfeld says, hi, great job. Remember Temple Wilson Hall in Carbondale?
Yes, of course. We were there together.
Let me see. I'm going to get one more question.
Okay.
Or two. We have people from all over the country.
That's very
Is Stuart Packer your brother?
Yes.
You are a popular guy.
I'm somebody's brother or father. That's very true.
There you go. There you go. Rob, this has been fascinating. So for someone who didn't grow up in Chicago, I'm not familiar with lots of the history of, the synagogues. We moved out here. We moved to your hometown of Buffalo Grove, where we've lived for the last 20 odd years. And, we go to our synagogue in Long Grove, but this is fascinating for me. And I had the pleasure of actually going through these pictures with Rob and putting together this little PowerPoint presentation. But the pictures are all Rob's, and the stories are incredible. I would like to know how you remember all of these facts. Someone said you need to be on Jeopardy and represent the Chicago synagogue community. So,
well, first of all, I want to thank you all for inviting me to do this. This has been absolutely a pleasure. This is my first program on my new book, so I hope everyone enjoyed this. I'm not I'm not as well versed on this as I am from some of my other programs that I did, 10, 15 years ago. But I love the questions. The questions are the best part of the program, talking with people. And that's the problem with the COVID, is that I miss the interaction I would have had with the audience, in an earlier time. I think there was a really good question coming up from David Stallman. Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, he was asking about the synagogues out here in the northwest suburbs, which we haven't gotten to yet. But David and I actually are members of the same synagogue. We live both in Buffalo Grove. So thank you for those questions. And Rob and I are gonna.
Dave and I know each other since the 50s. We went to B'nai Zion together. So
there you go. We are going to, for the audience that's still with us, we are going to look at doing some more programs like this. Rob is a wealth of information, and what better place to share this information than with the community of the JCC and the surrounding areas. But we have people from Ohio, we've got people from Florida, I think there was somebody from Nashville, we've got people from all over Chicago. So I mean, this is fantastic. I'm super excited and thrilled that everybody was able to join us today. There were a couple of questions about whether or not this was recorded. Yes, it was recorded. It will be posted in the next week or two on the JCC Chicago Arts and Ideas YouTube page, so you can look for it there. Again, Rob, thank you so much. This was definitely a labor of love for me. I'm glad that we were able to connect and put this together. So thank you so much.
And Hillary and Eileen, thank you so much. And thank you, panelists. Great questions. Just to answer one question before I leave, how do I answer everything? How do I remember everything? chalk it up to age. Long-term memory is really good when it comes to being older. I can't tell you about breakfast yet today, but I can tell you about what happened in 1930. So because it is a labor of love, it's something, I guess because I was a former history teacher, I love facts and information. And because I'm so invested in this, and as I can tell from your audience, they are invested as well. It makes it all really worthwhile. I look forward to coming back to talking to you about another program. But thank you. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Please check jccchicago.org. We've got many more great programs, some more interviews with filmmakers, authors, some more visits to Frank Lloyd Wright sites, sneak peek film festival coming up virtually in November, so be on the lookout for that. And again, thank you so much, Rob. We'll talk soon. Everyone, take care. Be well.
Be well, everyone. Be safe. Bye-bye.